Welcome into Training Camp Live, presented by Publix. Casey Phillips here with Scott Smith. Day 2 of padded practices here with the Buccaneers. As always, we're going to be trying to show you guys as much of practice as we can. We've got our awesome little robo cam that can show you guys some of that, because we know it is so sad that no fans can be out here this year, so we're going to do our best to give you as much of an insight into practice as we possibly can. We're also going to take fan questions from both YouTube and Facebook later in the show, so go ahead and start getting those in, and it's so awesome to see that we have all these different platforms where people are watching it, wanting to ask us questions, so go ahead and submit those. YouTube and Facebook will be checking those later in the show. For now, we've had a day of practice. Yesterday when we were doing this, it was all kind of based on stuff we'd heard over the whole off season, but now we've at least had a day of practice to watch a little bit, heard some feedback, had a lot of different media availabilities with guys. So wanted to hear some of your initial thoughts on, from yesterday particularly, what you learned.
Well, when we finished up here, we went over and watched the rest of practice, and the first thing I saw was 7-on-7, which is a passing drill, and it looked very sharp there. I mean, it's not a surprise. Nobody's going to be surprised to hear this, but Tom Brady looked very sharp. I remember one pass in particular to Scotty Miller between like 4 defenders, a little bit down the field, down a seam. That was just right on the money. Went back and watched a little bit of some OTA stuff from the previous days and from practice footage. Saw a lot of really sharp passing, but just don't take my word for it. Head coach Bruce Arians afterwards said he was pleased with the first practice and the 2 OTAs that came before it. He's liked the tempo so far. They finished early yesterday, and he says that's a good barometer for him, because if he's finishing early on the schedule, he doesn't add any more to it. He just says, well, that means we did a good job keeping the speed up, moving from drill to drill fast, and so on. He said there was an ebb and flow. You know, the defense won some drills, the offense won some drills, and honestly, I think that's what we'd want. We wouldn't want to see one side completely dominating the other one. So it was a good start from that aspect. I think one thing that didn't surprise him, but he wants to see differently, is the linemen getting their pad level down. He says at the beginning, first time you put on pads, it happens every time. The guys stand up too straight. The offensive and defensive linemen do. They need to get their pad level down. You know, getting low is the key to winning those one-on-one battles in the trenches. So that's just something that's going to come with time, but on the first day, it needed a little work. Yeah,
that's interesting. You talked about the ebb and flow of when it's the offense, when it's the defense, which actually I don't know if people can hear. This is really funny. We've had helicopters buzzing the field yesterday and today, and this is part of the Brady effect, I believe, that we've had people circling. Sometimes it's the Care Flight helicopter.
I think that's St. Joe's helicopter.
Yesterday it was the helicopter of news stations showing practice. So it's just funny how now it's just a bit of a different vibe now with him out here. So you talked about the ebb and flow of, you know, offense and defense, and how it is what you want, where no one side is winning deliberately. But I feel like it's almost even more encouraging that that's the case right now when you've missed so much of the offseason, because you've always talked about how one side typically can be a little bit ahead of the other one in training camp. So what does that mean to you, that it is already even right now?
It probably means that Coach was right when he said several times that Tom Brady is where he needed to be at this point. You were worried about how well he'd have the playbook down and the terminology, how quickly he could access it and spit it out. And I guess he's doing pretty well. Otherwise, I would think the defense would be well ahead, and especially because, as multiple people pointed out in the last couple of days, this is kind of a tricky defense. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of disguising. Todd Bowles really is big on disguising, making it hard for the offense to figure out what's going to happen up to the point of the snap and even a little bit after the snap. So if the offense is holding its own against that, that's probably a pretty good sign at this point.
Yeah, that's great. We actually did have a Facebook question from someone, from Irvin, asking who looks stronger, the offense or the defense.
Well,
so would you say now that it is pretty even in your mind?
Well, according to Coach, it was pretty even, yeah.
Yeah, which is always
I think is a good sign. We'll see. There will probably be one side or another pull ahead in the days to come. And Coach is usually pretty forthcoming about that, so we'll find out.
And I know we are going to talk more about the defense, but to say how even they are, we're going to have our play of the day sponsored by Frontier. Take a look at it real quick. Come in. It's great to see Rojo have a good big run like that. So how do you feel like that position group, what are we going to be looking for in training camp to get a better feel for what's happening there?
Well, I think what you saw there was a very good couple early cuts on that run. I wouldn't read too much in the fact that he broke out in the open field, because that happens on virtually every run.
Yes.
And they tend to run it all the way to the end zone and then come back. It's a conditioning thing.
Every play is a touchdown at this point.
Yeah, but those were some really sharp cuts early on. And they really are banking on Rojo having taken another step forward this year, which would probably mean 1,000 rushing yards. And I think that's probably his goal for the year, to get to 4 digits. He obviously made a gigantic step forward last year. I think the coaches think he looks even better this year, and he should be even more comfortable in the offense. There's little things that he wanted to clean up, like his pass protection and so on. But this is a very naturally talented guy, and it started to show up last year with some big plays, even in the passing game. So I think what they'd like to see is him really take over in that backfield. Keyshawn Vaughn and LaShawn McCoy and so on will be fighting for their niches, as Coach said, but I think they'd like to see Rojo really take over. Hey, there's some running backs.
And yeah, there you go. And just a reminder, right now, this part of practice is special teams focused. And this is going to be a really important part of practice. That sometimes I think we can just kind of brush aside special teams part of practice and say, oh, it doesn't show us a whole lot. But this year, when these undrafted guys and rookies are going to have less time to prove themselves at their actual positions, potentially no preseason games, special teams could really be the thing that can set some guys apart and earn them a roster spot.
So I think what you just saw there was a snap of the long snapper snaps, and you get a one-on-one on a punt. So on a punt, if you're one of those interior guys, your first move is to try to beat your guy and get in real quick. But once the kick is off, you got to turn and go real quickly. So that's what they're practicing right here. I think that was just Cousin Daniels on the last one.
Yeah, he's someone that I'll be interested to see, and that actually works out well. The next thing we were going to talk about is the outside linebacker position in particular. And, we know it's funny, the wide receivers and the outside linebackers are such an interesting position when you have two very set 1 and 2 guys.
Right.
And then after that, it's sort of this whole mess of guys trying to fight for those other positions. So we had a big outside linebacker media day yesterday that after practice you had their position coach Larry Foote, you had JPP, you had Anthony Nelson, all those guys talking to the media. So overall, based on the things that you heard in there and what they said about practice, what did you learn about where that position stands behind JPP and Shaq?
Yeah, so the third man in the rotation last year was obviously Carl Nassib. In fact, to the point of over the last 9 games, those 3 guys accounted for all the possible snaps at OLB except for like 65 over 9 games. So you see you're only talking about your 4th guy getting in about 6 or 7 snaps a game. But obviously it worked. You see here, the source here is NFL Next Gen Stats. Not only did Shaq and JPP lead us to tie for 7th in sacks in the league, but pressures are sometimes just as important. They just aren't highlighted enough. Not every pressure leads to a sack, but a lot of pressures do disrupt plays and lead to errant passes and so on.
Yeah, they could lead to interceptions, just as easily, maybe even be a bigger impact on the game than a sack.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good stat right there, and a lot of that was provided by Shaq and JPP. But the third guy was Carl Nassib, and he was a good player. He gave us 6 sacks, and I think he had 6.5 the year before that. Really hard worker when he was on the field, went hard every play. So who's going to be that guy now? And I think yesterday we even said the best case scenario for this team is it being Anthony Nelson. Anthony Nelson, the second-year player who was a 4th-round draft pick, got slowed down by a knee injury before the season, so that made it a little hard for him to get momentum heading into his rookie season, and then later he missed a bunch of times with another injury. So he didn't really get a chance to show what he could do, but the coaches had seen it on the practice field, and they were excited about him going into the season. Now, apparently he has looked fantastic through the OTAs that we had in the first practice without being prompted. Before we were even talking about the position, Bruce Arians was asked if anybody stood out to him in the first few days, and we're counting the OTAs. I know everybody thinks that we just started camp yesterday, but we're counting OTAs as well. And he said TJ Logan, Chappelle Russell, and Anthony Nelson. And so then we later started talking more about that in general, or in depth, and he just said he's had a heck of a camp so far. Larry Foote was raving about him, says he is the guy that's going to be your third guy, and Anthony Nelson is he's very excited about that opportunity, and there are a lot of similarities. He's practically the exact same size as Carl Nassib. They're both very long with their wingspans. They both got a lot of talent, but also work very, very hard. And Anthony says he studied a lot of what Carl did last year, his moves, certain things that he did, and he says he wants to incorporate as much of that as possible into his game and then put his own spin on it, as he put it. So I think there's a lot of excitement that he can absolutely step up and be that third guy.
You mentioned how he was built exactly like Carl Nassib, and this is something that I remember we talked about at the beginning of last year before we saw anybody play, or especially before we knew exactly what this Bulls defense was going to look like. And we talked about how unconventional it sort of was, Carl's build for that position, that he was so tall and so long, and that we didn't know what that was really going to look like at that sort of the way that the outside linebacker role typically is in this 3-4. And now it's so funny. It shows how well they did last year and how well Carl Nassib did, that we're thinking of it as this big positive that Anthony Nelson is built like he was. So just what did you learn about what that position could look like amongst all those guys in this Bulls defense overall?
Well, the reason you say that is because these guys playing outside linebacker, yes, they rush the passer on most snaps, but sometimes they do have to drop into coverage. And it wasn't just new for Carl Nassib, it was new for JPP. He said that yesterday. He said, I am actually still learning this position, and a lot of that has to do with coverage, when you have to sometimes drop into coverage. And they liked what those guys did. And that's another thing that Bruce Arians specifically pointed out, that Anthony Nelson, despite being 6'7", you don't think of a 6'7" guy dropping into coverage, but he has been doing that and he's looked good. So that's a big challenge for those guys in this defense. And I'm not saying that's a bigger part of their role than rushing the passer, but they do have to do it sometimes, and you can't be a liability. And so far, apparently, they like what he's done in that regard.
Something I loved that Anthony Nelson said in his media availability is he was asked by people how ready Tristan Wirfs was going to be, and he specifically was asked this because they went to college together, played together, know each other, and I know they've worked out a lot together in this offseason. And he brought up the fact that, well, yeah, he's going to be going against JPP and Shaq in practice every day. That'll get you ready. And you forget about the benefits of that, especially in a year like this, when you don't have practices against other teams, you don't have preseason games. The quality of your own team on both sides of the ball is so important for how ready the other side of the ball is going to be.
Yeah, I think that in a lot of years that's a little overblown, but I think you're absolutely right. In this case, JPP was pointing out that that's basically taking the place of the preseason games that Tristan Wirfs would have got. He would have got some very valuable experience, and now the first time he takes a snap, it's going to count. But he will have had a lot of experience going against those guys, and that's going to help him a lot.
And another rookie that we're looking to see how he does is Antoine Winfield Jr., and I know he had a pretty impressive day yesterday, got the attention of Bruce Arians in his media availability afterward.
Yeah, he said that, and this is important for these rookies. He said Antoine Winfield's a very sharp guy, so he's picking it up quickly. That's not going to happen with every rookie here and around the NFL. It just simply isn't. But this is a guy that could be counted on. He said that he expects Winfield to be in the mix for a starting spot very quickly. So, you already have some pretty good candidates there. If he's putting himself in that mix quickly, that means he's doing well, and I think it's because he's got a good grasp of what's going on.
Well, let's get to know him a little bit better since he is going to be a big part of this team, it's sounding like. So here's our Meet the Rookie with Antoine Winfield Jr.
Football became a part of my life ever since I was a young kid. I feel like the earliest I can remember is being 2 years old, playing football with my dad. My dad played in the NFL for 14 years, so I feel like he's the one that put the ball in my hands at an early age. So I've been playing ever since I could really walk. A lot of people always ask me if there was ever any pressure to play football, living up to my dad's name, but there was never any at all. At an early age, he told me that I didn't have to play football if I didn't want to, but I play the sport because I love playing it.
He'll throw. End zone for the win, and it's intercepted, and Minnesota wins it.
Favorite part of the game is creating takeaways for our team, giving our offenses more opportunities to score the ball, ultimately results in wins for the team. So being able to create takeaways is probably my favorite aspect of the sport. My mentality is that anything is possible as long as you're willing and able to put the work in throughout the week. And I would say, like, starting on Monday, we would come in, we start our first install, and then, we go watch film, go to practice. One thing I would do was always come after practice and catch 25 balls in the jug, just to get my hands right. I do that throughout the entire week. At the end of the day, you come in with that mentality that you're going to work hard and that you're going to get results at the end of the day. The biggest goal this year is to be the defensive rookie of the year. That's my goal. Getting there, learning all the plays, and eventually earning a starting role. So, it's little steps along the way, but long-term goal, I want to be the defensive rookie of the year and a Super Bowl champion.
As the national spotlight shines on Tampa Bay, a new reality is staring the Buccaneers in the face. During this time, it's important to establish a sense of normalcy, which brings Chris Godwin to a familiar place.
You want a treat, buddy? Hey. Hey, you want a treat? There you go. Good job, buddy. Just being able to kind of step away from everything that's going on, all the craziness in the world, all the change, that we've had going in the last 2 weeks, to come out here, take a deep breath, enjoy a little bit of the weather, walk some dogs, man, and just kind of get a little bit into like the routine of what we normally do.
It's all part of a bigger mission for the Team Godwin Foundation to help raise awareness for the animals that currently live in shelters and to ultimately get them adopted into loving homes.
This one's yours. I don't think I've ever saw a third that big. That looks like the emoji.
People right now with the whole quarantine thing, people are like, oh my God, I have to stay in my house. Like, I can't do anything. It sucks, and it does. But then it's like for a shelter dog, they're in a kennel that's a lot of times, how big do you think kennels are? 8 feet, like back, like 8 feet deep, they just sit there. So it's like if you have time and you can, even if if you can't adopt, you can foster. If you can't foster, you can volunteer. If you can't volunteer, you can donate.
Me and Mariah, we've been together for 8 years now, and she's my partner in crime, man. Like everything that we do, we just do it together, and I feel like that's so unique because, and with as much time as we spend together, I feel like most people get tired of each other, and thankfully we just have it.
We recently just got engaged. We were out in Cape Town, South Africa, and really just enjoying everything that they have to offer out there. It was really beautiful. I'm sure she'll remember it forever. She loved mountains and stuff like that. So.
And he was shaking as if he didn't know the answer.
Oh,
After 9 years of spending every day together.
It's more nerves than anything else I've ever done. Use my hands for a living, but can't put a ring on.
Welcome back into Training Camp Live, presented by Publix. Casey Phillips here with Scott Smith, and we are, as always, trying to show you as much footage as we can of what's going on at the practice field. We're also going to be taking some of your questions from YouTube and Facebook in our last segment here, so make sure you're sending those in right now. And we just saw that feature about Chris Godwin, which I love. I love how active he's already gotten in the Tampa community. He's got his own foundation that's trying to help dogs, and I got to actually MC his first sort of launch of it last year, which was really great. And he and his fiance are just so passionate about it, and they brought some dogs out to the facility last year, which was my favorite day of work in a long time, to be able to get adopted. I was like, yes, please, let's do more of this. Yeah. This is great. Football and dogs, it doesn't get any better than that. But let's talk about him on the field and the wide receiver group as a whole. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, we kind of know they're pretty good. They're probably going to be our starters. Okay, so after that, seems like there's a whole mess of guys. Same thing like what we talked about last segment with the outside linebackers, that you got your top 2 guys, and then it's all up in the air after that. So where do you see the shaking out of how many we keep, the types of guys you're going to need, and what it's going to look like, especially with Brady as your quarterback as compared to last year, that what this offense could look like and the types of wide receivers you need?
Yeah, just like we talked about how Shaq and JPP combined for 28 sacks, which is the most by any 2 teammates. Mike and Chris were the best, just by the numbers, the best wide receiver duo in the NFL. Chris ranked 2nd in the NFL in yards per game. Mike was 4th. And those numbers there are already impressive, but that's not even taking into account that Mike missed almost 4 games and Chris missed about 3 games at the end of the season. They were both on pace to get near 1,500 yards. So to have 2 guys on pace to get around 1,500 yards that late in the season is pretty rare. Obviously, like you said, there's nothing to worry about at the starters. And even though this team is loaded with pass catchers, when you look at the tight ends, maybe a couple of the backs are involved, it's still going to go through those 2 guys first, right? There's just no reason you wouldn't continue to target them on a huge basis. I mean, I think they both had about 120 targets, and again, they missed a number of games at the end of the season. So Tom Brady is going to throw to the open guy, and those guys are good at getting open. He's going to throw to the guys that are going to make plays for him. So they're still going to be the 2 main guys. We hope to get a lot out of the tight ends and some running back having more catches than last year. But beyond that, at the wide receiver group, it is really kind of uncertain. And I think they like a lot of those guys. Just last week, Coach was raving about how well Justin Watson was doing this year. He got a little playing time at the end of last year and helped himself with that. He hadn't really had much in terms of receptions or targets through his first season and 3 quarters, but looked like he could produce at the end of last year. And coach was raving about it. He said he clocked him at, those vests that they wear that are doing all kinds of metrics, clocked him at 21 miles per hour on one route, which is really good. He's slimmed down a little bit, so apparently that's helping him with his speed. And then yesterday, Coach talked about how Scotty Miller is starting to show up every day. And I talked about that play I saw, and then I looked at some footage from the OTAs, and I saw several more just like that where he's hitting the seam. His speed is showing up. He's getting open deep and in the seams. And so you got those two guys. There's a lot of candidates. We could talk about Brian Mitchell. Unfortunately, Tyler Johnson hasn't been able to practice yet. Some other young guys there, but Cyril Grayson with all his speed and John Franklin with his versatility. So there's candidates there, but there's a lot to sort out in the next few weeks.
Yeah, and you brought up, Tyler Johnson. What would we think of his role being, and how could him missing this amount of time potentially jeopardize that? That is, I mean, a 5th-round pick is not someone that you're looking at as a lock to start necessarily as a rookie, but they were speaking pretty highly of him. And so now when you've already missed all this offseason and now you're missing this time, what could our expectations be of his role?
I think we probably need to temper them a little bit. And just to begin with, wide receiver, I think I said yesterday that running back is probably the position where it's easiest to come in as a rookie and immediately make an impact. Wide receiver is very much on the other end of that spectrum. You see it every year. There are guys like Mike Evans who come in right away and have a 1,000-yard season, but that's actually pretty rare. I think I read yesterday there's only been like 11,000-yard rookie receivers in the last 15 years or something like that. It usually takes them at least to year 2. I mean, if you look at Chris Godwin, he was very promising as a rookie, but didn't get anywhere near 1,000 yards. Mm-hmm. Second year, he made a big step forward, which a lot of guys do, and then the third year is where they really blossom. That's exactly what happened with Chris Godwin. So we may have to wait a little bit, at least into this season, before we really see what Tyler Johnson can do. But I know when they drafted him, they liked how he just has a knack for getting open at all levels, not just underneath, but deep, and that he really can operate out of the slot. And Chris Godwin was a great slot receiver. He's probably our best slot receiver, and he actually led the NFL in yards on passes caught over the middle, in the middle section of the field. So obviously he's great out of the slot, but it'd be nice to have other options if you want to keep Chris on the outside on certain plays. Tyler Johnson could also eventually work in the slot. I just think we probably need to, especially with his injury, we probably need to expect that it could be a bit before he really has a big role in the offense.
And I know we had just seen a shot of the quarterbacks throw into the tight ends over there, and I know in the break you actually saw an interesting drill that the quarterbacks were doing. Can you tell everybody what you saw?
Well, yeah, it's funny. They're already working on wet ball drills. And actually, you'd think if they started early enough today, they wouldn't even have to do it artificially, because when we walked out here, there was a lot of, dew and just a lot of condensation.
A little bit of humidity, just a wee bit.
Clyde Christensen was actually taking water and soaking the footballs and giving them to the quarterback, so they're already doing wet ball drills. Obviously, the point of that is you got to be ready to throw a wet football, especially if you're going to have games in September in Florida. So you usually do see a wet ball drill at some point during training camp, but I was surprised to break it out already.
Yeah, which is, and we did see them throwing to, we have the receivers right now and also the tight ends. O.J. Howard also spoke to the media yesterday. What were some of the takeaways you got from that?
Okay, one of the big things is, I'll tell you this, O.J.'s not concerned about his role in the passing game. He says, I'll make plays in the passing game. What I think I really needed to work on was my footwork in run blocking. He says he felt like he regressed a little bit last year, and that's a big deal for him to be better in that this year, and that is important to be on the field. And he was on the field a ton. He actually had a career high in snaps last year, even though his receptions went down. So, but in terms of him catching more, because you do want more than 34 catches out of him, Coach was saying that's in his offense, the tight end position is a very complicated position. It's already a tough position because not many positions have such responsibilities as being really good at blocking a great defensive end and also going down the seam and catches passes athletically. So it's already a tough position, but apparently in this offense, it's particularly complicated. And both Coach and O.J. acknowledge that, and O.J. says he's got a much better grasp on it now, and Coach said the same thing. So Coach said O.J.'s looking good. That's really good, because if you could put Gronk and O.J., and of course Cam Brate as well, but Gronk and O.J., what O.J. was saying was when he and Gronk were out there on the field at the same time, it was a really bad mismatch for the defense. Because that's a big set, 2 tight ends, but you don't know. Both those guys can go out into routes and be mismatches. What defense do you put on the field against them? Do you put another line? Do you stay in your base? Or do you go to a nickel and now maybe a corner is covering a big tight end like O.J. Howard? So it's tough for defense to decide what to do, and that's what he means by mismatch.
Yeah, and I think O.J. Howard creates that mismatch more than almost any other, because I remember even when I don't remember who said this. I think it was Devin White right after we drafted him, that he said he was looking at O.J. and just thinking, how are you a tight end? Like, you're a wide receiver, but then
He's
how are you a
big.
wide receiver? You're huge.
Yeah.
That he, like Devin White's, that was his immediate thought is like, oh my gosh. And I even said before the show, we were talking about this, that OJ walked out. He's like 3 fields away from me. And I could immediately see when he walks out that even compared to all these other football players out here, he's just this monster. It's insane. And so for him to be as good of a wide receiver as he is and as big as he is, it's hard to imagine very many tight ends that create more of that mismatch than him.
And guess what?
And then
Gronk is even bigger
I was
than
about to
him.
say, and then there's Gronk.
Gronk
And
is
we
even
have both
bigger.
of them. This is great.
So
And I feel very bad for the defenses, except for the fact that I want the Bucs to
one
win.
of those
so I
two
don't.
guys, will be the scariest number 2 tight end in the league.
Isn't that insane? So actually, I want to talk about this. Okay, so Gronk comes in, and inherently that you think that means, okay, well, Cam or OJ or someone's losing some snaps. But if it means that we go into 12 personnel more often, does it mean that? Like, who is most affected in their playing time or their role by him coming in, and does it inherently mean guys are going to lose snaps?
Well, you make a good point, and they do. We were in 12 personnel, which, if anybody doesn't know, is 2 tight ends, 2 receivers and 1 back. About 20% of the time last year. Actually, I think it was exactly 20% of the time. And that was actually a little bit above league average, which was about 18%. But Coach has said a couple occasions during the offseason that they'll probably use 12 personnel more often just because of the tight end depth. So if now maybe you go up to 25% of the time, that's more snaps available to tight ends. That being said, you can't look at adding Rob Gronkowski and think it's not going to take some snaps away from OJ and Cam. But overall, you're going to have a good number of snaps of tight ends on the field, and they're all very good. So whatever the combinations are, I'm sure there'll be different packages for different combinations of those two. Occasionally you use all 3 at the same time, though probably not very often. But again, when you have any of those 2 of those 3 on the field, you're probably going to have a big mismatch with that second tight end. And one thing about Gronkowski that Coach was saying yesterday is that he is having to adjust to a Florida training camp, and it's been a bit
Aren't we all?
it's been a bit of an adjustment for him.
Yeah, and I'm sure that is another thing that we haven't talked about, of the losing all of those OTAs and minicamps. And I actually made this joke to somebody the other day that I felt like I also lost all of that in my preparation to stand in the heat for multiple hours. And I mean, it's a joke, but it's also kind of true that for these guys that there wasn't this gradual getting used to it where, yeah, in May it's hot, but it's not August hot, and they're just coming from all of a sudden potentially other parts of the country, who knows where, and being thrown right into this Florida heat of a training camp. So yeah, Bruce said that it was apparently taking its toll on Gronk a little bit.
Yeah, the humidity really.
Yes,
It's been really high.
We get it. We totally do. So, looking at, we talked about the different roles that the tight ends and wide receivers could have. Let's talk about it specifically in light of who Tom Brady is and what he likes to do. So we've looked at kind of each of these guys and what they bring to the table, but knowing what he tends to like in a wide receiver, in a tight end, I mean, of course, the familiarity he has with Gronk, what do you feel like that's going to mean, and how could potentially his, likes and dislikes influence this Byron Leftwich offense and what we saw from last year?
Yeah, I think that there's something to that, but I don't know how big an effect that is, because I think if you look through Tom Brady's career, which is long enough to have gone through many iterations of offenses.
You got quite a sample size.
When he had Randy Moss, he and Randy Moss put up insane numbers, and that was the receiver. When he had Gronk and Aaron Hernandez at the same time, they used those 2 tight ends like nobody else in the league. The production out of those 2 guys was incredible. In the last couple of years, when the receiver position has been thinned, he's thrown a lot to running backs, like James White has caught a ton of passes. So I think he's going to go with what we have, and he's still going to throw the ball, like I said earlier, to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin a lot. Maybe one thing I could say is he's really, really good with slot receivers. I think every quarterback can use a slot receiver to great effect, obviously, but his precise passing, guys have said this, his precise passing can make him better out of the slot, because they can give them the ball in a very specific position, to be able to gain more yards after the catch. As long as they're running the routes the way he wants them to run, he's very much a stickler about that. So I could see the slot receiver being more productive this year, whoever that may be. But otherwise, I think he's just going to go with the strengths of the offensive personnel.
Okay, well, we are going to lead into our shots of the day now, our amazing team photographers that are out here getting you closer to the action by a zoom lens than we can get you from having to stay 10 feet away. So here's our shots of the day.
I know what time it is. You dig? You dig that? That John Wall, man. Gang. Ah. That'll be a good taste. How come everybody got 30?
Welcome back into Training Camp Live, presented by Publix. Casey Phillips, Scott Smith here. It's time for our final segment. This is where we get to some of your questions. Before we do, I love that camp cam. That cracks me up.
I'm a little impressed at how much they're getting into it.
Yeah, I love it.
It could have gone either way, but they're enjoying it.
Yeah, maybe it's because there's no people out there. There's just a camera sitting there with a little whiteboard that tells them today's the smile cam or the flex cam or the whatever. So the fact that there's no people, that it just feels like they get to ham it up, I feel like that might be a part of it. But I love it every time.
We got a lot of hams.
Yes, I think that is also part of it, and we do have a lot of hams on this
Did you
team.
see Jordan Whitehead flexing right there?
It is terrifying when he flexes. The fact that he's just a DB, like he's built. He's basically like O.J. Howard, just kind of like shorter.
Shrunk down a little bit?
Yeah, like just a miniature O.J. Howard.
He's
but yeah,
O.J.'s mini-me.
I would not have thought after last year that Jordan Whitehead could get like bigger.
More ripped?
And like more, yeah, it's insane. And then apparently you just put him in a quarantine and that's all he does
Sean
is
Murphy
lift.
Bunting is bigger too.
That's
Bigger
true.
and
That's the
stronger.
thing. You put him in a quarantine.
8
All
to
they got
10
to do
pounds of
is
muscle.
lift. That's so great. Okay, we're going to get into some of these questions. Again, you can send them on YouTube or on Facebook. We had a question from Brandon that says, what did the DBs look like so far? Well, based on the flex cam, that's
Strong.
definitely,
They look strong.
Yeah, pretty strong at this point. But yeah. So overall, what do you think the DBs are looking like?
I think they had a pretty. I think you saw some in the stats in the highlights there. They had a good day. You saw Antoine Winfield force a fumble. I don't think it was in the highlights, but I saw Jordan Whitehead, we were just talking about, break up a pass by. It was to O.J. Howard, and he just closed really fast and basically arrived at the same time as the ball and kind of, thumped O.J. without knocking him down, and it broke up the pass. I did see a Jordan Whitehead interception on an OTA bit of practice footage too. I think it's a really talented group. The way they came together at the end of last year, and if the safety position can get solidified, because that's been a bit of a revolving door. If that can get solidified and you're getting some good playmaking out of that group to add to what the corners were doing last year, it could be one of the better secondaries in the league, which we would have had a hard time predicting about October of last year. I don't think we would have felt comfortable saying that by the start of next season, this secondary has a chance to be one of the better ones in the league, but I think we do now.
Okay. And Teresa asked, how is our offensive line? We want Tom Brady to be protected.
Well, I think that's a talented starting five. I think we all love Ali Marpet and think maybe with the extra attention this team is likely to get this year that, that's an interesting shot.
Just a close-up on you.
Just a close-up on me.
Yeah.
With the extra attention that our team is expecting to get with Tom Brady and hopefully with more winning, that guys like, we always say Levante David, but maybe Ali Marpet too, maybe Ryan Jensen will get some Pro Bowl buzz, This team is very high on Donovan Smith, and they felt like he had a very good year last year. Tristan Wirfs is talented. It could be a bit of a difficult transition for him from the NFL, especially with no preseason games as we were talking about. But like you said, JPP and Shaq will sharpen him. And then Alex Kappa, they felt really good about what he did in his first year as a starter and expect him to take a step forward. If you're looking for that type of answer, I can give that. I think there's a lot of optimism that they're going to be good. If you're looking for how do they look on the practice field, we've seen half of practice, and like I was saying before, they're struggling in the way that you would expect at the beginning of camp with keeping their pad level down, but that's something that will get better with time.
Okay, and this is perfect with that, the flex cam that we had just seen. Brandon asked, who do you think has bulked up a lot and that could help them this year? Meaning, who is that really a very beneficial thing to have done?
Well, we already talked about Jordan and Sean Murphy Bunting. I don't know. Jordan's a good hitter, so maybe being bigger will help in that regard. Maybe Sean with more strength will be better in press coverage. But another guy that's done so is Ronald Jones. He's gotten a little bit bigger and stronger, so that obviously will help him break tackles and so on. Actually, and then we have had a few guys have gone the other direction, like Jordan Whitehead slimmed down a little bit. So I meant to say Justin Watson slimmed down a little bit.
I was like, wait a minute.
Could help with his speed. So we'll see. I don't know at every position how much more of an advantage it is to get 8 to 10 pounds stronger and bigger, but it can't hurt.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I guess it
that's
could
very
if you
true.
went too far with it, but
Jack asked, first of all, Jack said he's watching from Hong Kong, which is very cool.
Wow.
He said, is there any chance that Tristan Wirfs doesn't start versus the Saints, and would Joe Haeg be good enough to step in if that happens?
that's almost verbatim what Coach Bruce Arians said the other day. I think they do think Tristan will be ready by then, but they do acknowledge that it's possible because of this weird offseason and training camp that a rookie won't be 100% ready. They won't feel 100% confident in week one. They are very confident in Joe Haeg. They know exactly what he has done. He started at both tackle positions. He has something like 35 career starts, so he's an experienced guy that knows what he's doing. And yes, he would step in, and I think they feel very comfortable with it. Even then, though, I think it would be just a matter of time until Tristan Wirfs is in that spot.
Okay. And Irvin asked, how many running backs do you think the Bucs will keep?
Well, like I said yesterday, they kept 4 on the roster all year. And coaches tend to have a particular formula for how they fill out that 53, 4 tight ends, 5 inside linebackers, et cetera, that they like to stick with as much as possible. And then, sometimes you have to fudge with it. If we just got too much talent, we can't cut this 4th tight end, so we have to only keep 5 receivers or something like that. I think, but it is a good barometer of what happened last year. And they kept 4 running backs on the roster all year until T.J. Logan broke his thumb. And then when he went on IR, they didn't add another one. And I think that's mainly because T.J. Logan was really at that point only returning kicks. He wasn't really involved in the offense, so they didn't need to replace him on the offense, and they could use receivers and people at other positions to return kicks and punts. This year, though, Coach was raving just yesterday about T.J. Logan, said, I think people forget he's a running back. He can help us on offense, which is the first time he's really said anything about that, and that's an interesting point. So I would think you keep 4 guys. Ronald Jones is obviously the starter. I said yesterday, cutting a 3rd-round pick before the season starts is almost never happens. It's happened one time in team history. So I'm pretty confident Keyshawn Vaughn will be on the roster. I think LaShawn McCoy will make it probably, but he's probably battling with Dario Gumbawale. And then probably the 4th spot could be between Raymond Calais and T.J. Logan. And I think there's a very good chance you keep 5 or 6 of these guys around because you've got the big practice squad that you can put anybody on. So it could be that all of those guys are eventually involved in the game, but I would say on the active roster to begin the season, I would guess 4.
Okay, and PJ asked, what's going on with Justin Evans?
Well, he is still on active PUP. He's still trying to come back from his foot injuries, which he's just had apparently some just not good fortune with. Hasn't been able to get on the field for now. It's about a year and 3 quarters that he's been able to play. And I know at the end of last season, they were hoping he'd be ready by training camp. The fact that he's not, you just simply can't view that as a positive sign. Hopefully he'll be back on the field soon. But the fact that he had to start training camp on PUP feels unfortunate. It feels like the window for him starting the season on the active roster is closing pretty quickly. So the reason you put a player on active PUP is so that you have the option when the season starts to put them on reserve PUP. So that could happen with him if he doesn't get back on the field. As of today, he's still not in practice.
Okay. And Doug asked, with the 4 protected spots on the practice squad, is there a limit to the player's salary, and does that salary count against the cap if it qualifies?
I would want to know the answer to the first question, and I don't know that. That is a very interesting question because it's strange to me that they're allowed to protect 4 guys from being signed away, because one of the great things about being on the practice squad is if some other team wants you on their active roster, they can just sign you. So it doesn't limit your opportunities. So you wonder if those protected guys get a higher salary for that reason, and I don't know the answer to that yet. I think there's a lot of little weird rules with the roster this year that we're going to be getting information on slowly and gradually. The second part of that, you got to remember that if you're getting a higher salary, it's still probably the minimum salary, and the salary cap is calculated by the top 51 salaries on the team. So there are plenty of guys making minimum salaries that are below the top 51, so you really wouldn't probably have to worry about that affecting your salary cap at all.
Okay. And Daniel asked, how will the team develop and show the depth chart? Will fans know where everyone stands as camp goes on?
Could you repeat that, please? I missed it.
How will the team develop and show the depth chart, and will fans know where everyone stands as camp goes on?
That's a good question, because we always are eagerly awaiting the first depth chart every year. And you know why we get it? Because we have preseason games. So by now, we would have had a game by now. Would we have played a game last weekend, I think? So
Yeah.
we would have been required to publish a depth chart prior to that. And so now we'd all have one, and we'd be happy about that. Now that doesn't probably need to happen until sometime in September. And do you think coaches are eager to rush out that type of information? I don't think most coaches are going to put out a depth chart until they're absolutely, totally required to do so. So I wouldn't hold my breath on seeing an official depth chart from the Bucs within the next few weeks.
Okay.
I just don't think there's any reason the coaches are going to want to do
Right,
that.
yeah, that's a good point. And a question from YouTube we had is, what position is John Franklin playing?
He's running with the wide receivers right now, so I guess you'd say wide receiver. I think they envision him as a guy that could do a lot of things, maybe even on game days be an emergency third quarterback, help out on special teams. But I would say right now he's got to be classified as a wide receiver.
And we had a question of who is the fastest Buccaneer?
They were arguing about that on Camp Cam, weren't they?
Yes,
they were. You were just talking about Camp Cam.
Yep.
There was a couple guys that said it's obviously me. Scotty, I think Scotty at the end not only said so, but was trying to race different guys. I guess if I had to choose somebody, I'd probably choose Scotty Miller. But I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, I think that not like this is the determining factor. He was the fastest rated of like the Madden scores on our team. But
well, that
I'm
means
pretty
something.
sure that everyone on the team would argue that that doesn't mean anything because they get upset about their Madden score. So I don't know how much that's going
Well,
to.
it was speed that got Scotty Miller drafted. So I would think, that's real.
This is interesting. I saw a question about the idea of soft tissue injuries when people tend to start football, that's kind of just something that happens around the league is when people get back to football. Do you feel like that's going to be affected by the lack of offseason and getting back and not having preseason games, of just the fact that it's going to go almost from 0 to 60 in 0.2 seconds?
Should. I don't know if you saw the news on Gerald McCoy yesterday.
Yes.
Our former friend, I don't mean former friend, but our friend who used to be here. Just bad luck for him on the ruptured quad, which sounds like a very painful injury. Yeah, I would think there'd be some more soft tissue injuries. Coach was talking about the key to all of this, especially here, is just hydration. You gotta you gotta be on that all the time. If you're dehydrated in practice, it's already too late. You gotta be prepared before practice. And this is something I've seen throughout the years. I've always been amazed by. Used to be able to walk through the locker room when we were at training camp in Orlando, and the players were charting their weights before and after every practice, and you'd just be amazed at the swings in one day. Guy goes out there at 270 pounds at the end of first practice, he's 262. By the start of the next practice, he's back up to 265, and then he's down to 260, and the next morning he's back to his original weight. That's amazing. But that coach says it's very important that they be able to put that weight back on after they lose it at practice.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Training Camp Live presented by Publix. Thanks to all of you for watching and for submitting questions. We will be back here tomorrow morning. Here's a look at the training camp schedule, and we'll see you next time.